Vampire King complains she is suffocating him. She overhears, gives him all the space he'll regret. The castle stood on the edge of the cliffs like a dark sentinel, its towers reaching toward the stormy sky. The wind howled across the rocks, carrying salt from the sea below, and the waves crashed against the jagged cliffs as if trying to challenge the castle itself. Inside, torches flickered along the cold stone walls, casting dancing shadows that made the corridors seem alive. This was the home of the Vampire King, a man whose name carried fear and awe across the lands. Isolde had arrived at the castle at twilight. She had not expected to see such grandeur, nor to feel such a strange pull toward the ancient stones. She was a mortal, small in comparison to the vast fortress, yet something in the castle whispered to her, calling her to step closer. She had come here by chance, some said, or perhaps by fate. She had no family left, no home to return to, only the strange letter she had received, signed by the king himself, summoning her. The first time she saw him, she almost gasped. He stood in the tallest tower, a figure in black, pale skin glowing faintly under the silver light of the rising moon. His hair fell like silk over his shoulders, and his eyes, red, deep, and unreadable, watched the night. There was power in his stance, the kind of power that demanded attention even without words. He was the kind of man who could silence a room with a look. Isolde had been shown to a chamber near the library. She unpacked her small belongings carefully, feeling the weight of the castle's history pressing against her. Every corner seemed to have secrets, and every shadow seemed to move. Yet, despite her fear, she felt something else, a curiosity that made her heart beat faster. Perhaps it was because she sensed that the king was not just powerful but lonely. And loneliness, she knew, could sometimes make a man dangerous or soft in ways no one expected. It did not take long before their first meeting happened. She had been walking through the hallway, her fingers brushing the cold stone walls when she heard footsteps behind her. Before she could turn, a voice, calm but sharp, spoke. "You wander too far." She spun around to see him standing there, tall and imposing. His gaze was penetrating and his presence seemed to fill the entire corridor. I was just exploring," she said, her voice a little shaky. He raised an eyebrow. "Exploring can be dangerous in this castle. You do not know what lurks in the shadows." She nodded quickly, though part of her wanted to argue. There was something in his voice that both warned and intrigued her. She wanted to speak freely, but a strange caution kept her silent. In the days that followed, Isolde learned more about the king. He was a man of strict rules, yet he was not cruel. He demanded respect, but he also commanded curiosity. The servants whispered about him, telling tales of his temper, his power, and the many who had dared to cross him only to vanish from history. Yet to Isolde, he seemed more human than anyone she had ever met. There were moments when his mask of control slipped, when he stared at the moon as if lost in memory, or when his hands trembled slightly as he handled objects from the past. One evening, she accidentally overheard something she was not meant to hear. She had been walking near the council chamber, drawn by the sound of voices, and pressed herself against the cold wall. Through the slightly open door she heard the king speaking to his advisors, his voice low but sharp. "She suffocates me, her presence, her questions, her constant care. I cannot breathe." Isolde's heart clenched. She did not understand fully. Was he speaking literally, or was it a complaint of annoyance? Her chest tightened and she stepped back quietly, not wanting him to see that she had heard. She felt a sudden distance open between them. She did not speak to him the next day. She did not linger in the hallways. She kept to herself, even when he looked in her direction with those piercing eyes. Days passed in a strange silence. The king noticed her absence immediately. He expected her to be present, to question, to intrude in small ways as she always did. Yet now she had disappeared from his sight. There was a peculiar emptiness that he felt, a sense that the castle itself had grown colder without her near. At night he would stand on the balcony of his tower, gazing at the stormy sea, thinking of her, though he could not admit it. Isolde, meanwhile, wandered the castle carefully. She found hidden corridors, secret rooms, and the old library filled with dusty tomes. There was magic in the air, a history written in stone and blood and forgotten whispers. She began to learn about the king's past, the ancient curse that had forced him to isolate himself, the betrayals he had endured, and the powers he possessed that made him both feared and lonely. She realized slowly that his complaint was not as simple as she had thought. Perhaps he feared closeness, yet he could not escape the strange pull she had over him. One night, as rain lashed against the high windows, she found herself in the garden, a hidden space full of night-blooming flowers and stone statues worn by time. The moon shone silver on the wet leaves and the air smelled of earth and rain. She did not notice him at first. Then from the shadows his voice reached her. "You should not be here." She turned, startled, but did not flee. There was something in his tone, softness wrapped in authority, that made her stay. "I am not harming anyone," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. He stepped closer, and she saw the faint tremor in his hands, the conflict in his gaze. I did not expect you to take your distance so seriously. You should not have listened to my foolish words." Her heart ached at his honesty. "I thought you wanted space," she said softly. Yes," he admitted, "but now I feel the absence like a weight. You have given me what I asked for, yet it feels heavier than your presence ever was." For the first time, she saw the man beneath the king. Not the ruler, not the immortal, but a being trapped by power, fear, and longing. She realized that this distance, which she had thought was protection for herself, was beginning to change him. It made him confront emotions he had buried for centuries. The wind rose suddenly, sending rain across the garden. He did not move to leave, nor did she. They stood in silence, the storm around them echoing the storm inside both of them. Then, in a moment that felt suspended outside time, he extended a hand, not commanding but offering. "You may not understand yet," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "but you are important. More than I can allow myself to admit." She took a small step closer, though her hand remained by her side. "And you, my king, are terrifying." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Perhaps," he said. "But you will learn that I am lonely, and fear can be complicated." The night stretched on, filled with unspoken words, lingering glances, and the sound of the rain beating against the stone. Isolde realized that the space she had given him was doing more than just protecting her. It was stirring something inside the king, something that he had not allowed to grow for centuries. Awareness, vulnerability, and perhaps longing. When she finally left the garden, the king remained on the stone path, staring at her retreating figure. He could feel the weight of his own emotions pressing down on him, emotions that he had long denied. He understood with a clarity that frightened him, that her absence was teaching him about his own heart in ways he could not control. The castle, silent now but alive with shadows, seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the vast corridors, secrets waited, and destiny moved quietly, shaping the paths of the mortal and the immortal alike. Neither knew fully what lay ahead, yet both felt the inevitability of their connection, a connection wrapped in fear, desire, and the unspoken understanding of each other's power. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Isolde stood in her chamber, staring at the silver light spilling across the floor. She felt the stirrings of hope and fear intertwined. The king, alone in the darkness of his tower, clenched his fists, realizing that the space she had given him was not the relief he had imagined. It was a challenge, a mirror reflecting the emptiness he had carried for centuries. And so the story began, not with declarations of love, but with silence, distance, and the slow awakening of two souls bound by fate, each learning that closeness could be terrifying, yet unavoidable. The storm outside had passed, but the storm within had just begun. Cliffhanger, From her window, Isolde glimpsed the king standing on the highest balcony, staring out at the sea. His figure was still, but his eyes glowed faintly red in the morning light. He seemed lost in thought, and yet aware that the absence she had chosen might soon change him in ways he would not be able to resist. Somewhere deep inside, he knew he would regret asking for space, though he did not yet understand why. The castle seemed quieter now, yet the silence was heavy, filled with the memory of footsteps, whispers, and glances that lingered too long. Isolde moved carefully through the halls, her footsteps soft on the cold stone. She had chosen to give the vampire king the space he had asked for, or so she thought. Her heart still ached from the words she had overheard, words that she had misunderstood but that now carried weight in her mind. She spent her days exploring the castle's hidden corners. There were rooms that had not been opened in centuries, filled with dust and relics of a past that felt almost alive. In one such room, she found a large mirror, its surface dimmed with age. As she gazed into it, she saw not just her reflection but something more, a flicker of movement behind her. She spun around, expecting a servant or the king himself, but the room was empty. Only the wind moved the heavy curtains. Even in her absence, the king was aware of her. He felt the emptiness of her presence more keenly than he expected. Every corner of the castle that she had touched, every room where she had lingered, seemed to hum with her memory. He began to notice the small things he had ignored before, the way she arranged books, the way her footsteps paused at the sound of his voice, the way her eyes had looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. The more she stayed away, the more he realized how much he had taken for granted. The complaint that she suffocated him now seemed like a foolish mask, a shield to hide the truth, that her presence had become a part of him he could not escape, even if he wanted to. Isolde, meanwhile, continued to explore the castle with careful curiosity. She discovered the library, a vast chamber filled with old tomes and scrolls, some so old that the paper had turned to dust. She ran her fingers along the spines, feeling a strange connection to the knowledge preserved here. She read about the history of the kingdom, about the king's ancestors, and about curses that had bound the bloodline for centuries. One book caught her attention, a small leather-bound journal, written in a delicate, flowing script. It belonged to the king himself. Hesitating, she opened it, expecting anger or warning, but what she found was far more revealing. The pages were filled with thoughts of loneliness, fear, and regret. He wrote of the weight of immortality, of the burden of ruling, and of the fear that attachment would destroy him. Her heart ached as she read his words. He was not cruel nor heartless. He was simply trapped in a life that left little room for trust or love. Her discoveries made her feel both pity and understanding. She realized that giving him space was not just a way to protect herself, but also a way to challenge him, to show that her presence could exist without imposing, without suffocating him. Days passed in this quiet rhythm. The king noticed her absence, and with each day, his awareness of her grew stronger. He began to watch her from the shadows, silently observing her movements. He saw the way she studied the library, the way she paused in the garden to admire the night-blooming flowers, and the way she walked with cautious confidence through the halls. Each observation stirred something deep within him, a longing he could neither name nor resist. One night a storm swept over the cliffs. Lightning split the sky and thunder shook the castle walls. The king paced the balcony, the wind whipping his dark hair across his face. He thought of Isolde, alone in the castle, perhaps frightened by the storm. Despite his earlier complaints, he felt a sharp need to see her, to ensure she was safe. Yet pride and habit held him back. He could not admit that her absence had created a void in his existence. Meanwhile, Isolde found herself drawn to the castle garden once more. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and clean, and the moon shone through the dissipating clouds. She wandered among the flowers, feeling a strange sense of calm. It was as if the castle itself was guiding her, showing her the paths she had not yet explored. Suddenly, a shadow moved behind the trees. She froze, her heart quickening. From the darkness, the king emerged, his eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. "You should not wander alone at night," he said, his voice low but not harsh. "I can take care of myself," she replied, trying to sound confident though her pulse raced. He studied her for a long moment. There was a tension between them, a push and pull that neither could ignore. "You have given me space," he said finally, "and yet I feel your absence more than I expected. It is heavier than your presence ever was." Isolde felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. She had intended to protect herself, to create distance, but her choice had revealed the truth. He could not live without acknowledging her importance. "I only wanted to respect your wishes," she said softly. He stepped closer, and she could see the conflict in his expression. His red eyes were intense, filled with emotions he could not name. "And yet, it seems I am the one who is learning," he admitted. "Learning that distance can teach me more than proximity ever did, that perhaps I need you more than I thought." For a moment they stood in silence, the moonlight casting silver across the garden. The air was thick with unspoken words, and both felt the weight of their emotions pressing upon them. She realized that her absence had made him confront feelings he had hidden for centuries: fear, longing, and a desire he could not easily control. The king's hand moved slightly as if reaching for her, yet he stopped himself. He was torn between pride and need, between fear of closeness and the pull of her presence. Isolde understood without words. She would give him space, yet she would remain near enough that he could not ignore the connection between them. Days turned into weeks. Isolde continued to explore the castle and its secrets, finding joy in small discoveries. The sound of a hidden fountain, the pattern of the stone floors, the way sunlight filtered through stained glass windows. She began to understand the king's world, his responsibilities, and the loneliness that weighed on him. The king, in turn, grew restless. He found himself walking the halls at night, seeking her presence even when he told himself he did not want it. He watched her from a distance, feeling a strange warmth when she smiled, a pang of regret when she seemed distant. The space she had given him was no longer a relief. It was a mirror reflecting his own heart, showing him the emptiness he had carried for centuries. One evening, as the sun set behind the cliffs, the king approached the library where Isolde was studying. He did not enter immediately. He stood in the doorway, watching her, his expression unreadable. She sensed him and looked up, meeting his gaze. "You have been here often," he said, his voice soft. "I enjoy learning," she replied. "There is so much history here, so many stories waiting to be told." He nodded slowly, as if considering her words. "And yet, I fear you will uncover truths you may not be ready to face." "I am ready," she said firmly, though her heart raced. "I want to understand you, the castle, the history." For the first time, he allowed himself a small smile, a gesture that seemed almost human. "Very well," he said, "but know this: understanding comes with its price. Knowledge can be both a gift and a burden." She nodded, sensing the weight of his words. She realized that her journey here was not just about curiosity, it was about connection, about understanding the man behind the legend. And the king, for the first time in centuries, felt the stirrings of something he had thought impossible: trust, and perhaps even desire. That night they met in the garden again, under the silver glow of the moon. They walked among the flowers, speaking in quiet tones, sharing stories and observations. Each word, each glance seemed to draw them closer, yet the distance remained, a delicate balance neither wanted to break too quickly. "You have changed the way I see this castle," the king admitted, "and perhaps the way I see myself." "And you have changed the way I see you," Isolde replied. "I thought you were cold, distant, untouchable, but I see now that you are complex. Powerful, yes, but also human in ways you hide." He looked at her, and for a long moment neither spoke. The wind stirred the leaves, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers, and the stars shone bright above. He realized that her absence had taught him more than her presence ever could. He understood now that his complaint about being suffocated was not about her presence. It was about his fear of admitting how much he needed her. The night deepened, and Isolde returned to her chamber, leaving the king alone in the garden. He watched her retreating figure, feeling the weight of emotions he could no longer ignore. She had given him space, and in doing so she had stirred a desire and longing that would not be easily silenced. The castle, silent and ancient, seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the wind whispered through the towers, carrying the secrets of centuries. And inside, two souls, one mortal, one immortal, began a delicate dance, learning that distance could awaken desire, and that longing could become a powerful force neither could deny. Cliffhanger. That night, as the king stood on his balcony staring at the silver moon, he sensed her near but not present. The emptiness she had created pressed on him like a shadow he could not shake. He whispered her name softly, a sound that carried both regret and need. Deep inside, he knew he could not remain indifferent for long. The space she had given him was no longer simple. It was a test, and he was already losing. The castle was quiet that night, but the air was thick with unspoken words. Isolde walked through the halls, her footsteps soft on the stone floors. Even after weeks of careful distance, she felt the pull of the king's presence. She could sense him watching, not with anger, but with a tension that made her chest tighten. His need and pride were in constant battle, and she was caught in the middle, wondering if he even realized the effect he had on her. In the garden, the moon shone red, casting the flowers and statues in an eerie, crimson light. The night-blooming flowers glimmered with dew, and the shadows seemed to dance, wrapping around the ancient stone paths like ghosts of the past. Isolde paused, letting the quiet wash over her when she sensed him approaching. "You are daring," the king said from the shadows, his voice low and deep. "I am only walking," she replied, though her heart raced. "The night is beautiful." He stepped closer, and the red moonlight fell across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the deep intensity of his glowing eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to be vulnerable, though he still held back the part of himself that had frightened so many. "You are persistent," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Even when I have asked for space, you do not vanish completely." "I wanted to respect your wishes," she said softly, "but I also wanted you to see that I can exist near you without suffocating you." The king studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, in a sudden motion, he sat on the edge of the fountain, the water reflecting the crimson light of the moon. "You do not understand," he said, his tone darker now. "Space, absence, they are dangerous for me. I am not like other men. I have lived centuries, and yet I have learned little about trust, about connection. You awaken feelings I cannot name. You make me feel something I have avoided for so long." Isolde stepped closer, drawn by the honesty in his voice. She did not speak, but her presence was enough. The king's gaze flickered over her, lingering on the small curve of her lips, the determination in her stance, the warmth in her eyes. "I do not know how to handle this," he admitted. "I thought distance would protect me and perhaps protect you as well. Yet, now that you are near and yet distant, I feel it more than ever. Your absence, your careful restraint, it torments me." Her heart ached at his words. She realized now that giving him space had not created distance between them. It had forced him to confront his own feelings. And he was struggling, torn between the need to retreat and the need to reach out. "I did not want to hurt you," she said quietly. "I only wanted to understand you and to give you the freedom to breathe." He shook his head, running a hand through his dark hair. "Freedom, yes. And yet your freedom, it feels like a mirror showing me my own emptiness. I cannot stand it and I cannot reach it. You have made me realize how much I need you, even when I deny it." The words hung in the air like sparks waiting to ignite. Isolde felt the pull between them, the tension that had been building for weeks now ready to break. She understood that he was struggling with centuries of fear, pride, and the loneliness that had been his companion for too long. And yet, she felt a quiet strength within herself, knowing that her careful presence had brought him to this point. The night deepened and a chill wind swept through the garden. The king stood, stepping closer to her, his eyes searching hers. "There is more I must tell you," he said. "More than the complaints, more than the shadows you have seen. My life, my curse, it is heavier than you can imagine, and yet I feel that you will bear it with me." Isolde nodded, her fingers brushing against the cool stone of the fountain. "Tell me," she said softly. "I want to understand you fully. I want to know everything, even the parts you hide." He hesitated, then spoke, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "Long ago my family was cursed. A betrayal turned our bloodline into something eternal, yet lonely. We gained strength, yes, but also a price. Love, connection, they are dangerous for us. I have avoided it, guarded against it, feared it. And yet, you make me wish I had not." Isolde's chest tightened. She had suspected something of his past, but hearing it confirmed in his own voice made the danger and weight of their connection real. She reached out, lightly touching his arm, and he flinched slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of feeling her closeness. "You do not frighten me," she said quietly. "I want to face it, all of it, with you." The king's eyes glimmered with red under the moonlight. He looked at her for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, took a hand from his side and placed it over hers. The warmth of her touch was foreign, yet grounding. He felt a strange mixture of fear and relief, of longing and restraint. "You are brave," he said, his voice low. "Braver than any mortal I have known. And you," she said softly, "are stronger than you believe. You hide your heart, but I see it." They stood in silence for a moment, the crimson moon casting their shadows long across the garden. The world seemed to shrink to this single space, this fragile connection between mortal and immortal. The air pulsed with tension, each heartbeat a reminder of how close they were to something dangerous yet inevitable. Then, suddenly, the stillness was broken by a sound from the castle, a low rumble, almost like a warning. The king's head snapped up, his instincts sharp and alert. "Stay here," he commanded, though his voice betrayed concern. "You should not be caught unprepared." Isolde did not move. She trusted him, but she also knew that the danger outside was part of their world, part of the truth she had chosen to face. "I am not afraid," she said softly. He studied her again, a flicker of emotion passing over his face, admiration, longing, and fear. Then, without another word, he moved past her, disappearing into the shadows of the castle. Isolde stood alone for a moment, feeling the weight of the night and the pull of the king's presence even in his absence. Later that night, she returned to her chamber, but sleep did not come easily. Her mind replayed their encounter in the garden, his words echoing in her heart. He was struggling, she realized, struggling to reconcile his fear of attachment with the undeniable pull she had over him. And yet she also felt a growing strength within herself, a certainty that her careful distance, her willingness to stand firm, was forcing him to confront his true feelings. The next morning, the castle was calm, yet tension lingered like a shadow in the halls. The king appeared briefly at breakfast, his expression unreadable, yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion as they met hers. He said nothing about the night before, yet his presence alone spoke volumes. The space she had given him was beginning to work in ways neither of them could fully understand. Days passed, and the king allowed small moments of closeness, testing whether he could handle her presence without feeling overwhelmed. They exchanged glances, brief conversations, and moments of quiet connection, each charged with a tension that neither could ignore. The more he allowed himself to feel, the more aware he became of the depth of his longing. And the more she observed, the more she understood that her careful strategy, giving him space while remaining near, was beginning to change him. One evening, as the moon rose again, crimson and full, They found themselves alone in the highest tower. The wind howled against the walls, and the storm from earlier had left the sea below restless and churning. The king leaned against the stone railing, gazing at the horizon. Isolde stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against his. "You have grown quiet," she said softly. "I am thinking," he replied, his voice low. "Thinking of you, of this, of everything I have tried to avoid." She placed a hand on his arm, steadying herself against the tension between them. "You do not have to avoid it anymore," she said gently. "I am here, yet I am not pressing. You can feel, you can think, and still be free." He looked at her, and for the first time his walls seemed to crumble slightly. "Freedom," he repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. "I have denied myself for so long. And yet you make me wish I had not." The night stretched on, filled with words unspoken, glances that lingered, and the weight of emotions neither could fully control. They stood together under the crimson moon, the castle silent around them, yet alive with the history and magic that surrounded them. Cliffhanger. As the night drew to its deepest hour, a sudden sound echoed through the tower, a footstep, deliberate and heavy, approaching from the hall. The king stiffened, his senses alert, and Isolde felt a thrill of fear and anticipation. Whatever or whoever approached would change everything. The connection between them, fragile and raw, was about to be tested in a way neither had expected. The castle walls were alive with shadows that night, moving as though the stone itself breathed. Isolde stood at the edge of the highest balcony, looking down at the cliffs where waves crashed endlessly against jagged rocks. The crimson moon hung low in the sky, reflecting off the wet stone of the castle, casting everything in a deep red glow. It was a night heavy with magic and meaning, a night that seemed to hold the past, present, and future all at once. The king appeared from the shadows, silent as the night itself. He did not announce his presence, for he knew she would sense him. His eyes, glowing faintly red under the moonlight, searched hers with an intensity that made her heart race. For weeks, their relationship had been a dance of distance and desire, silence and confession, each testing the boundaries of the other. Now everything was on the edge of breaking or coming together. "You have been patient," he said, his voice low but steady. "Too patient, perhaps. You gave me space I did not understand I needed." "And now," he trailed off, struggling to find the words that had eluded him for centuries. "And now?" Isolde asked softly, stepping closer, her eyes reflecting both curiosity and courage. "Now," he said, "I cannot stand it any longer. I cannot deny what I feel, though I have tried for centuries. Your absence taught me what I had hidden, and your presence, it makes me confront it. I cannot escape it." Isolde felt a thrill run through her. His words were no longer veiled in complaints or restraint. They carried truth, raw and undeniable. She reached out, touching his arm lightly, and he did not recoil. Instead, he seemed to lean into the touch, as if drawing strength from her courage and patience. "You do not need to hide anymore," she said. "I have seen the real you, and I am not afraid. Whatever your past holds, whatever your fears are, I will face them with you." For a moment, the wind howled around the towers, and the castle seemed to hold its breath. The king's walls, built over centuries of fear and pride, began to crumble. He took her hand fully in his own, gripping it tightly but gently, as though anchoring himself to her. "I have been alone for so long," he confessed. "I forgot what it meant to care, to trust, to love. I feared it would destroy me. And yet, here you are. You have brought me life, though I never asked for it." Isolde's heart swelled with emotion. She had understood his loneliness from the beginning, but hearing it in his own voice made it all the more real. She took a step closer, letting their hands touch fully, their fingers intertwining. "Life is never meant to be lived alone," she said. "Even for a king, even for someone cursed." He looked at her with something raw in his eyes, something he had hidden for centuries. Vulnerability, longing, and fear all mixed together, yet beneath it a spark of hope. "I am not worthy of this," he whispered. "You are worthy," she replied firmly. worthy of love, of trust, of being seen for who you truly are. The storm that had once raged outside had calmed, leaving only the sound of distant waves and the rustling of leaves. They stood together on the balcony, hands intertwined, hearts beating in a rhythm neither had experienced in centuries. And for a moment the world seemed to pause, acknowledging their connection. Yet the night was not without danger. A shadow moved in the hall behind them, a presence neither of them had anticipated. The king's senses sharpened instantly, his centuries of experience and instinct taking over. He turned, his eyes narrowing, and saw a figure approaching. The figure carried a faint glow, almost ethereal, moving with purpose. "Stay behind me," the king commanded, his voice firm yet protective. Isolde nodded, trusting him completely. She felt the power emanating from him, the energy of someone who had lived for centuries yet still had the strength to protect and defend. The figure stepped closer, a messenger of the old court, an immortal bound by duty who had been watching the king's every move. "My king," the figure said, bowing slightly, "the council knows of the mortal presence here. Some demand her removal, others advise caution. But there is a threat approaching that requires both your power and her courage." The king's eyes darkened. "I have chosen her. Whatever threats approach, she is mine to protect and mine to trust." Isolde felt a surge of emotion at his words. She had given him space, yet he had claimed her in the most honest, protective way possible. And she knew in that moment that their connection had grown stronger than fear, stronger than pride, and stronger than centuries of loneliness. The messenger nodded and vanished into the shadows, leaving the king and Isolde alone again. The night air seemed charged with anticipation, as if the castle itself knew that their bond had reached a turning point. "Whatever comes," Isolde said, her voice steady, "we face it together." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "Together," he repeated, and for the first time he allowed himself to smile fully, a gesture that was both human and immortal, terrifying and tender all at once. The hours passed with quiet conversation, shared stories and confessions that had long been buried. The king spoke of centuries spent in solitude, of mistakes he had made, and of fears that had shaped him. Isolde shared her own past, the hardships that had led her here, and the courage that had guided her choices. By the time the crimson moon reached its zenith, they were no longer just mortal and king. They were partners in understanding, in trust, and in the delicate dance of love that neither had fully dared to embrace before. Then, as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the castle trembled slightly, as though echoing the heartbeat of the world itself. Magic, ancient and powerful, stirred within the stones, responding to the bond that had formed between mortal and immortal. The king turned to Isolde, his eyes glowing softly with warmth and power. "You have changed me," he said, "not through force, not through fear, but through your patience, your courage, and your willingness to see me." "And you have changed me," she replied. "You have shown me strength, depth, and the beauty of a heart that fears yet longs." For a long moment they stood together in silence, the wind carrying the scent of flowers and sea spray. Their hands remained intertwined, a silent promise that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Suddenly, a distant roar echoed across the cliffs, a warning of creatures that moved beyond the castle's walls, drawn by ancient power. The king's senses sharpened again, but this time there was no fear. There was readiness, strength, and confidence born of trust. "Whatever comes," he said, his voice firm, "we will face it, together." Isolde smiled, feeling the truth of his words in her very bones. She had given him space, but it had not created distance. It had awakened something inside him that even centuries could not suppress. And he had claimed her, not out of desire alone, but out of understanding, protection, and the acknowledgement of their shared destiny. The sun rose slowly over the cliffs, painting the sky with gold and crimson. The waves below shimmered with light, reflecting the new beginning that had formed between them. The castle, ancient and enduring, seemed to embrace them, recognizing the bond that had been forged through distance, longing, and courage. The king led Isolde to the balcony edge, looking out at the horizon. This castle, this kingdom, they are mine to protect. But you are mine to cherish. She looked at him, her heart full, her spirit steady. And I choose to be here with you in every moment that comes. He drew her close, not in possession, but in partnership, and for the first time in centuries he felt complete. The weight of solitude, the burden of power, and the fear of attachment had all fallen away, replaced by trust, love, and the courage to face the unknown together. The wind whispered through the towers, carrying with it the echoes of the past and the promise of the future. The castle, once a place of shadows and silence, now felt alive with possibility. And in the glow of the rising sun, the vampire king and the mortal woman stood together, not as predator and prey, not as distant strangers, but as equals, bound by courage, trust, and the undeniable force of love that had grown through space, longing, and understanding. Cliffhanger. As they embraced on the balcony, a faint glow appeared on the horizon, a sign of forces yet unseen. The world outside the castle was not silent, and challenges remained. But for now, in this moment, their bond had proven stronger than fear, pride, and centuries of loneliness. And both knew that whatever awaited, they would face it together, hearts aligned and unbroken.